Hello, dear friends, and welcome to episode 11 of the Found Humanity podcast. As you'll discover through his vast knowledge of geopolitics and history, this episode features an intellectually distinguished guest, Dr. Alexander Azadgan. I met Alexander while walking the boardwalk in Laguna Beach at an anti-Israel-Palestine war demonstration that showcased hundreds of faces of Palestinian victims, mostly children and women. Given the compelling display, the number of demonstrators holding signs, and my own ignorance of the issue, I walked over to read the signs and listen to some of the conversations between passersby and the demonstrators. After about 20 minutes of listening to the debates that quickly devolved into high emotions and into accusations, Alexander joined the conversation, demonstrating a vast knowledge about the history and the complexity of the topic, including the failings of both Israel and Palestine in working towards a successful resolution. His vast knowledge and nuanced thinking about the topic, as well as his distinguished academic and political background, immediately allowed me to respect his opinion, and we ended up talking about the history of the conflict for the next hour or so. I enjoyed the conversation and learned so much, I asked if he would be willing to do a podcast about the topic. So, who is this guy, Alexander? Alexander is a professor of business studies and international political economy at several colleges throughout Southern California, a senior geopolitical and national security policy advisor to several world governments, and the chief political counsel for the Center for Geostrategic Studies. He is also a member of the intellectual dark web, which is a loosely defined group of conservative thought leaders and commentators like Sam Harris, Eric and Brett Weinstein, and Jordan Peterson, who oppose political correctness, woke-ism, and cancel culture in higher education, in mainstream and corporate news media. In this episode, we discuss key figures in modern political discourse, the history of Judaism and Zionism, the three main Abrahamic religions' roles in shaping the current conflict going on in the Middle East, with an emphasis on Christianity, and the importance of challenging echochambers and one-sided political narratives through compassionate dialogue. It's worth noting that Alexander holds some very strong moral opinions on Zionism and the influences that he believes created and uphold it, and while my own research plus this conversation has moved me closer to some of his own opinions, I still consider myself largely agnostic due to my relative ignorance on the history of Zionism, Judaism, and the history of modern-day Israel. As you'll likely tell in our conversation, I still have much to learn. So if you're someone who is pro-Israel or is agnostic on the topic like I am, I encourage you to listen critically, knowing that you don't necessarily need to agree with everything or even most of what he shares. At the same time, just as I was, I hope you remain open to the possibility of considering the information, of asking questions, and allowing the information to shape your own personal research into these topics. Lastly, I realize the subject matter of this conversation is a noticeable deviation from my usual emphasis on universal themes and stories into a more particular topic that is political. However, as I had the conversation and as I went back over it in editing, I cannot think of a more spiritual and universal topic to discuss than war, history, religion, and peace. Developing a more factual and nuanced understanding of the things we discuss in this conversation are crucially important for understanding our own and other people's humanity, especially those who we may strongly disagree with. So if you find yourself agreeing or disagreeing strongly with the opinions expressed in this episode, I hope you're also able to understand something new about your own or someone else's human experience. Though we ran out of light towards the end of the episode, Alexander and I plan to reconvene in the future to discuss some of the more esoteric, mystical, and religious historical influences that have shaped modern geopolitics. So without further ado, here's Dr. Alexander Azadgan.
Hey, what's
girl, what's new with you?
The hell is that
No, I
supposed to
literally
mean?
cannot understand.
Why is he always
it just
trying
seems
so
like
hard?
she isn't even trying.
Might
So
just be a
why should
difficult
I?
time for him.
I'm pretty sure she knows everyone hates her.
You know, I've never really thought of it that way.
I guess I could see that.
But then I realized I'm just
like
like
her.
him.
Good to be with you, Chris. And the best things in life happen spontaneously.
Yes.
Coming across people and starting collaborations with them to help humanity. Doors open that we least expect, and that's what we call miracles of God.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. All right. So first of all, what sparked your interest in geopolitics, and have you always been conservative leaning?
I guess I would have to give credit to my dad, because when I was growing up and I was a teenager, Dad and I had a lot of interesting breakfast table discussions
Yeah.
about politics, global politics, international relations, geopolitics, and he was sort of projecting his own experience and about what he went through with Dad, because he was in the same sort of interest. My dad was also a professor, but he taught math.
Okay.
So I've noticed a lot of people who teach sciences or any other major, they have this other interest.
Yes.
That is not the moneymaker, but that's what they're really interested in. And my dad was one of those. So he taught math for many years, and Army guy. And so we started having these conversations. And so he sort of like, the seed was put in there. He sowed the seed in my soul. And from there, went to college and I had some really good history and political science professors. So I would say they actually really were encouraging of me.
Wow.
And one of them asked me, you got something to say? I said, yes, sir. He's like, then say it. And that, sort of was another seed. And then I went to corporate, the high-tech corporate, and then I got very interested in social causes, this one being one of them behind us. And I organized a lecture here in Laguna Beach, of all places. Most people don't think of Laguna Beach as a political city. They think of it as arts and, things of that nature.
Sure, yeah.
But right around the time of George Bush's war in Iraq, and we got to be very careful with our rhetoric. It wasn't the Iraq war, right? That's another neuro-linguistic programming way of defaming a country. When you say Iraq war, people automatically, subconsciously associate Iraq with war.
Yeah.
You got to say it was George W. Bush's, and I always say President Cheney and Vice President George W. Bush's war in Iraq. So when that happened, we got really active. That's how I found my voice, ultimately.
Wow.
We organized a conference near Laguna Beach. We were expecting 50 people. As I told you, 300 people showed up.
Wow.
And it just went from there. I got into academia. I got noticed by people, started teaching, and one thing led to another.
Yeah. So what year was that when you
2003, 4, 5. Actually, this was the first war that we started protesting before the actual war began.
Okay.
That's how people have become so anti-war in America,
Yeah.
regardless of party lines, you know, Democrat or Republican. I'm a libertarian, so conservative libertarian, not Republican. But we caucused with the Republicans. So that was in 2002, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2007 was the height of war. And then people slowly disintegrated.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they were, they thought they could change things, you know. They understand how grassroots movements work.
Grassroots movements, yes.
Yeah, they just thought if they're protesting and get a bunch of people, just what do you call it, pushing the horn on their car, that's going to get results. They didn't understand that.
Yeah.
They don't understand the process of peacemaking, which is very strenuous, and it's you're going to be in the halls of Congress, and anyone who's been in the halls of Congress, it looks like a mental institution because all the walls are white.
Yeah.
It's like what Christ said. Whited sepulchers, Inside you're rotting, on the outside you look beautiful.
Wow, wow.
It's really what Christ really summed it up 2,000 years ago. I mean, it goes into that. If you want peace, you got to go through lobbyists and very tedious stuff. So a lot of people left. We developed a community of people that were anti-war, pro-peace. A lot of them literally left the country.
Wow.
They just were fed up. And that's how it started.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what first indicated to you that the government was conspiring to, beyond, there was a PR war, right? The war in Iraq, the language used, the war in Iraq versus George Bush or Dick Cheney's war, there was a PR element of that, right?
Of course.
So what first alerted you to this conspiring, perhaps, that was going on behind the scenes, that was going to benefit the U.S. in some way?
When you read the right people, right? Back then we read, now everything is audiovisual. When you read the right people, throughout time, and as you use your objectivity and critical thinking skills, you realize what the truth is, what the reality of things are. What is the zeitgeist of the country? Zeitgeist is a German word which really means understanding the spirit of the times. Understanding the spirit of the times requires understanding human history. Understanding human history requires understanding human psychology. So you almost have to be multidisciplined. You need to know be an expert in sociology, psychology, social psychology, humanities, history, all the arts, right? All the social sciences arts. When you read the right people, and I know some people may listen to this and say, well, Howard Zinn was a liberal. Why did you read him? Yeah, I did. I read The People's History of the United States of America by Howard Zinn to understand the real history of this country. And I'm not putting it down. I'm not a wokeist or trying to destroy our heritage or going around and saying that the founding fathers are the framers, coming up with this gender neutral language, things like that. No, it's not about that. It's just about reading what you're not accustomed to.
Yes.
And that's what Howard Zinn really opened my mind about what we really have been and what is our real history. And then from there, I went to Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent, which is how you actually create consent and give your approval to wars. So these two books gave me the tools and a sense of reality and truth about what's really going on. So once you take that route, then lies become very obvious to you.
Yeah.
Like you were asking. Media lies will become very obvious to you. You can see the way they shape and shift the narrative,
Yes.
down to the words they use, down to pronunciations of certain words to use.
Wow.
Like they wouldn't say Iraq. They intentionally disrespect the country by mispronouncing it. Now, these are very seasoned journalists, they have senior editors. These are not accidental. Or with Iran. I've noticed after Iran attacked Israel in retaliation, everybody was going around and say Iran, which is a derogatory word to say Iran, or the country of Qatar. That's what they call it, right?
Yes, yeah.
The reason I'm mentioning this, Chris, is that you will actually have an understanding of how this little...
The language and the rhetoric.
Yes, and everything is in detail.
Yes.
So once you get into that your awareness and cognition into how they shift and shape lies expands.
Yes.
And once that expands, then you start attracting even more intelligent and articulate historians, social scientists into your life, and then it has a snowball effect as far as maximizing the truth that you absorb.
Yes, I love that. I love that. So one of my objectives explicitly in the conversation is, as you know, my whole path and branding is found humanity. My interest is how do we come together as humans and talk about what unites us? And so in that, right, I love divisive topics as well, because it's important to talk about the things that divide us, right? Obviously, war is one example of that, but war is uniting across party lines, as you mentioned, because so many people, Democrat, Republican, are coming together against war throughout the last, history of America, and beyond that. And so it's interesting to me that your first exploration of anti-war sentiments came from liberal thinkers.
Yeah, who would have thought?
And were you liberal in college or anything?
Well, there's a saying, that professor that I told you about, my political science professor in my undergraduate years, he said, Alex, if you're under 30 and are not a liberal, you're heartless. If you're over 30 and are not a conservative, you're mindless. So I was like, oh, great. At least I'm not heartless. So yeah, I wouldn't say liberal, but I was leaning toward Democrats. And you have to understand, I'm from a different generation than you. Back then, the Democrats were common sense.
Yeah.
They actually were common sense. Now they've gone off the deep end and alienating even their own base.
Yeah.
And they've become the party of war and new globalism and this kind of going around and becoming the policeman of the world. So if you understand this country's history, the roles shift. Back in the day, around Civil War, the Democrats were the racists and pro-slavery people. The Republicans, the party of Lincoln, were the actually emancipators. And so the roles have shifted and shaped throughout history.
Yeah.
Now, I would call them new Republicans. We still got the old establishment, neocon Republicans that are basically evil. Those have to be sidelined.
Yeah.
They're actually doing more harm.
Right.
But the new generation of Republicans that are really doing great work, especially on college campuses.
Who do you think some of those best star players are for the Republicans?
Turning Point USA
Okay.
is a good organization. Although the person who's the spokesman, I think he's a pompous narcissist.
Okay.
So once we get over personal grudges with people, I don't have a grudge against him. I just think that he exhibits some racism in between all the fantastic things he says.
Okay.
But the movement itself is good. Candace Owen, I really believe in, especially because she really put her heart on the line and spoke up against her benefactors.
Yes.
Who were, what was the name of the organization? with Ben Shapiro and all those guys.
Yeah. What's it called?
Um,
Daily Wire.
Daily Wire. He stood up against Israel and stood up for Palestine, not to be sectarian, but just to say, okay, these people are victimizing the other ones. Not that the other ones are great. I have talked about the tactics of some of these people, not exactly effective.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the pro-Palestine crowd. But she stood up and then she refused. He didn't allow these bullies to restrict her religion. She openly talked about things that used to be taboos, but in her very articulate, educated way, even though she doesn't have formal education.
Yeah.
The word education comes from the Latin word educare, which literally means bringing the best out of people. That's what education is all about. Boy, have we really gone off the other way, because education is about brainwashing now.
Sure.
So you have people who don't have college degrees and they're very articulate, and we have people with abbreviations after their names, such as BA or BS or MS or PhD. BS, bullshit. MS, more bullshit. PhD, pilot, high and deep. So people don't have these academic, backgrounds, but they're articulate. They got their thesis right, and so Candace Owen is one of them. Of course, from deep academia, we got Jordan Peterson, one of the great thought leaders. Candace is right on the Israel-Palestine issue, but Jordan is not, unfortunately. One of the big mistakes that Jordan made was give an interview to Netanyahu, literally a few days after October 7th. And he was praising him. And I would have expected, as a psychologist, he would have tamed his own psychological context into that discussion. But when he went on his Twitter or whatever, and he said, give him hell, that's not how high compassionate, empathetic doctors are supposed to be healers.
Right.
That's not how a healer talks. Everybody was upset. People said things on their social media. The kids call it shitposting now, right? But you have to understand, when you're in a position of power and influence, you got to be very careful with every word you use, especially in such sentimental and emotional times like this, where people are getting butchered. So Jordan Peterson is one of them. Brett Weinstein, again, I'm getting into him in the past 6 months. I'm impressed by what I hear. Wrong on Israel again. What I'm trying to tell you is that you cannot be a single issue voter. I could be completely turned off with what a thought leader says about a certain issue, but they're right on 9 out of 10 other issues. So going back to divisiveness, we gotta have everybody talks about interfaith dialogue. We need to have inter-academic dialogue with people like Peterson, and he needs to bring Muslims and Palestinians on his show and listen to what those people have to say.
Yeah.
But I'm really hopeful, because the age we're living in, with the speed of technology, when the right thought leaders emerge, their ideas are broadcasted on a speed of light almost.
Yeah.
So they're influencing more people. And the only thing I need to focus on that used to come from old academia, where it was actually reasonable back then, is critical thinking and objectivity thinking skills, which means you have to question everybody who says something, especially those who are opinionated. Yes. And their opinion is based on education and years of research and degrees. If it's worth something, you got to question them. And that is what we need to encourage, because I see a lot of echo chambers.
Yeah.
Young Turks, for example, is doing some good work, but on the left. I disagree a lot about what he said, but you saw them getting close to.
I feel that guy when he speaks.
Yeah.
The main guy, I forget his name, but he's like, I feel him.
Cenk, he's an American of Turkish descent.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going back to.
Very sincere in his
very
convictions.
Sincere. Yes.
And I respect that.
I respect that too. You could be sincerely wrong.
Yeah.
But at least you're sincere about it. My watch is echoing in your eyes. I think things have gone so far into the deep end that people who have minimal common sense are able to recognize between pure nonsense and something that's reasonable.
Yeah.
And I think the reasonable left, which I call the old liberals, people like Jimmy Dore. Jimmy Dore is a very influential comedian.
Okay.
He is what Bill Maher could have been. Bill Maher sold out to the company that owns CBS, which owns HBO. Bill Maher used to be a very effective comedian speaking political comedy. He's gone off the deep end. He sold his soul. He's completely mainstream, useless. lost a lot of his audience. Jimmy
did,
Dore didn't take that route.
I kind of like Bill Maher. I mean,
Bill
you know,
Maher is, I mean, I like him too. I watch him.
Yeah, me too. And his new podcasts and stuff.
Yeah, he does his podcast
He has a lot
in
of
his
different
house.
guests. Yeah,
you know,
he's
he's
at
got
his
the
house.
drinks and
That's so
the
cool.
whiskey and he's smoking his
He's
weed.
like the cool grandpa you want
He's the
to
cool,
have, you know?
exactly.
And
cool
he's like
grandpa.
he's up on stuff. You
Yeah,
know?
he's totally up on stuff. He really learns from his staff who are Gen Z and millennials.
Yeah.
He really took care of them, by the way, during pandemic. Paid their salary, and so he's a good person. I just personally, I on some issues I disagree with him, but he's reasonable enough to sit down and have a conversation.
I
with
love that.
because he's old liberal.
Yeah.
There's still some reason in them.
Right.
Jimmy Dore, like I said, is a comedian.
Okay.
Huge on social media, huge on all these platforms, but it's a word of mouth thing. Most people don't know of him because he was never given the corporate opportunities to speak his political comedy, but he would be considered a total thought leader, but with a nuance of comedy. Because when you're comic, when you're being comic-like, people bring down their guards and they just want to laugh.
Yeah.
So when you inject the truth in the middle of that, it actually resonates more.
Yeah, powerful tool.
Powerful tool. Joe Rogan is a great one, a great one. I mean, he's done so much for American manhood. It's incredible, and there's a wide array of them. I have a whole list. Michael Knowles is a Christian brother.
Yeah.
Very effective. Matt Walsh is doing some great work with LGBTQ.
I'm not the biggest fan of Matt Walsh.
I noticed.
agree with him
I
on a
noticed
lot of
on your
issues,
videos, yeah.
but I think he's great at rhetoric.
Yes.
Because, you know, he uses very inflammatory remarks,
Yeah.
you know, and humor,
Yeah.
incendiary humor.
What is a Woman? That documentary.
Yeah,
of his,
I just
What is a
watched
Woman?
I've never seen What is a Woman, but I watched Am I Racist 2
Yeah.
nights ago.
That's
And
the
I
new one.
cringed because it was like he was so rude and like hurtful towards both sides, actually.
Well,
you
he's
know,
trying to-
insincere.
He was doing the Borat thing.
He was doing the Borat thing, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, you know, my family and I, you know, I'm more conservative leaning at this point,
Yeah.
you know, and I've been more liberal in the past, but
Yes.
I agree with a lot of the points he's making, you know, or insinuating, but the way he's doing it, man, I don't know
He's
if I
trying to
agree with
trigger.
that. Yeah,
He really is trying to trigger
Yeah.
And provoke. Okay, there's a difference between the word trigger and provoke. The word provoke comes from a Latin word provocare, which has a totally different meaning than trigger. Trigger is literally triggering on the gun. You're
Yeah.
trying to, you know, intimidate somebody by really sort of threatening them that you're going to push the trigger and kill them.
Yeah.
That's provocare. It is more like trying to get some kind of, you know, intellectual reaction out of them to just listen. So provocare is actually positive, and I think he does that. I mean, I don't have a dog in that horse, but it is a very important issue. Gender ideology is a very important issue. So he does that. Michael Knowles, you know, also a thought leader.
Very smart guy.
Very smart guy, but he does it, you know, through a more Christian approach.
He does, yeah.
Calmer, the more collective, more compassionate. I think all of those approaches are needed.
I think you're
Everybody's
right.
got to play the role.
I think you're right.
As long as we're on the right side, which is common sense, let's just put it that way. If I say conservative, some people may get turned off. Although personally, I am devout conservative. And the reason people say, oh, why are you conservative? What is it? Conservatism means you conserve the lessons that were learned from the last failed civilization. That's all it means. You learn those lessons so your empire, your civilization doesn't end. So those of us who are conservative now not only learn from the mistake of the previous empire, which was the British Empire, but we go back and all the way down to the Roman Empire per se, and even further, Greek Empire, Persian Empire. We are academics. Most conservatives are actually really free thinkers. We're not branded.
I love that.
I posted something on my Facebook, I don't know if you saw it or not, that said, if Donald Trump, who we vote for, I voted for him,
Me too, yeah.
if he slightly deviates from everything that he talked about, going against big food, big pharma, what I call not just military-industrial complex, government military-industrial complex. He didn't talk about the big prison-industrial complex.
Right.
How judges are bought and paid for to put people in prison, because Halliburton is in that business too. Dick Cheney's corporation.
Okay.
He didn't talk about that one because he's old school, a Republican, go after crime and whatnot. But if he doesn't act on his promises, he will lose his base really fast.
Yeah.
And most people underestimate Trump's base as being stupid. They actually are not, even though they say things that sound really stupid. But they got their zeitgeist right. They got the spirit of the time that you're living in. They have a sense of heritage about our history, right or wrong. Sometimes they're a little bit over patriotic, although I think it's wonderful to be patriotic and even nationalistic, because that goes against the new global, let's all just have one rainbow republic. We're all just no borders.
A broader form of government.
Broader
over the
form
world,
of central government, usually in Brussels, Europe, and so, or Washington or Tel Aviv. You don't want that. You need to go back to local, national sovereignty model of patriotism, healthy patriotism, not insurrectionist, crazy ones, right? You don't change things that way, and it's not healthy, and it's against the law. So
let's pause there.
Yeah.
One of the core issues for you in your life right now that you've been passionate about is the Israel-Palestine conflict, and
Yeah.
I want to talk about this with an audience that
it's pro-Israel.
is pro-Israel,
Yeah.
right? And with them in mind.
Yes.
And you are someone who is conservative. You're
Yes.
a little bit of a paradox
Yes.
of like you are pro-Palestine, and
I would reframe that differently.
Okay, sure.
Before I tell you that, you had a hard time pronouncing my last name. My
Yes,
last name literally
yes.
means free men.
Oh wow!
So I have
Whoa,
a
love
tradition
that.
to live up to. I'm
love
not
that.
owned. It's like, yeah, I'm conservative because
Yeah.
that's a lot of things conservatives say today makes sense. But the minute they try to own me and say, look, you're conservative, therefore you should agree on this issue, which would be Israel.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. That's why I'm libertarian. I'm a libertarian conservative. Libertarian literally comes from the word liberty in a way. So we're free. We're not branded politically or socially, or you're supposed to go along party platform. No. I would even go a step further, Chris, and say I'm independent, actually. Sometimes I work Republican, sometimes libertarian. Depends on the system, the gerrymandering, electoral college. You got to take that into consideration when you live in California, a state that has just gone off the deep end when it comes to left and liberalism. But going back to the Israel issue, I don't agree with everything Palestinians say at all. I've gone to them and say, your PR basically sucks. You're giving your enemies an excuse to point the finger at you and say, look, you're a terrorist, because you behave like one. You behave like one. When you go to a college campus and you go on top of a statue of some historical figure and put the Palestine flag up there, no. That is a really dumb thing to do. It's disrespecting the legacy of that person who's put on a pedestal, which, by the way, is outdated. Literally is put on a pedestal. If you notice, we don't have statues of people anymore. That belongs in museums, but yet you gotta have a heritage. Somebody who achieved the founding fathers, they gotta have, at least in the capital of our country, they need to have statues.
Right.
So when they do that, when they disrespect the legacy of a leader, and put their flag and put their brand there, these are dumb things. This is what makes them look bad. The slogan from river to the sea, whether the Israeli state or the Palestinian state, is a completely cruel and uneducated thing to say.
Yeah.
That land was meant to be shared, whether you like it or not. The Jews have a claim to that land historically. Okay, if they come back after 2,000 years, well, to be technical with you, if they do come back after 2,000 years, that will be valid, because the Jews that were taken from Judea, Palestine 2,000 years ago were the real Jews, the ethnic Jews who were taken by the Romans, literally. The temple destroyed, even the menorahs and the artifacts of the holy temple of the Jews is actually ingrained in Roman archaeology in Rome. So it's documented. Those people were taken away 2,000 years ago. Every year, Chris, at their Seder or whatever religious ceremony they have, they say next year in Jerusalem. For 2,000 years, they've been saying that. So there's a deep tie for these people to that land. But if you're European and you're not genetically Jewish, which is fine, you want to convert to Judaism, God bless you. But if you're genetically not Jewish and you were not planted in that land by God, then you have no right to turn God into a real estate agent and say, that's my land. It is not. You converted to Judaism, you're more than welcome to migrate, but don't bring God into the equation. Don't cop out like that.
These are all very logical points you're making.
Yeah, the Ashkenazim Jews. The Ashkenazim Jews are the Jews of the Khazar Empire, which is current Ukraine is actually another angle of that, is located from the Caspian Sea all the way to the Black Sea. That whole West Central Asian area they were called the Khazarite people. Khazars were Scythians. Scythians were extremely courageous warriors. They were so famous that they became mercenaries in the Persian Empire, in the Roman Empire. I mean, they used to use bow and arrow on the back of a horse and shoot the target. At some point where Islam was coming up in the 7th century from Arabia, and the Holy Orthodox Russian Church was up there, they were sandwiched between these two religious forces. And they said, you know what? We're going to just convert to Judaism en masse. Because according to Islam, if you're a person of the book, Quran, which is if you're a Christian or a Jew, obviously as a Muslim, they would say we need to protect you. We have a responsibility to protect you, so you don't have to convert. So these people because of political experience, they converted to Judaism. And then centuries went by, they migrated west, which would be the east of Europe.
Okay.
Westward, which would be the east of Europe. Poland had a huge presence in Germany, these areas, Eastern European countries, and they became known as Ashkenazim Jews. Whereas the ethnic Jews, the blood Jews, right, they're the Sephardic Jews. And Sephardic comes from the word safari, safari, when you go to Africa, which in Arabic means traveling.
Wow.
It's a traveling person.
Yeah.
Like a gypsy Jewish person, right? And these people went all the way to Morocco, which was a Muslim country. And they're protected by the Muslims. The Jews and Muslims never had a problem until the Europeans came in.
Wow.
And projected their deicide mentality that you're Christ killers, which they're not. It was a Roman decision. I mean, we can go back to the book of Matthew and talk about that. That would be a great lecture for next time. But they somehow got caught in between the Catholic Church, the Ashkenazim Jews that were not genetic, nevertheless Jewish, observing the law, doing everything. But on the same token, you know, that's how that started. So going back to my point, and I'm going to say this, and this is very controversial. If any of these people hear it, they're going to want to kick my ass here. Israel has a right to exist. And Israel has a right to defend itself, just like the Palestinians have a right to defend themselves, just like we had a right to defend ourselves after 9/11. Sure. We all know what happened with that. I'm not going to go into that. But whatever. Everybody has a right to defend themselves or attack. If civilians are attacked, that is an un-Islamic thing to do. In the Quran, it verbatimly says you are not supposed to attack civilians. Especially they mention women and children and elderly. So when you do that, you're working for Netanyahu, and I'm talking about Hamas. Okay. I have 0 ounce of sympathy for Hamas. I've said that. I'm very much alienated in the Palestine community to a point where people say, don't say that when you're on our podcast. And I said, adios, I'm not doing your podcast anymore. So I'm not, I don't fall into a box.
Right.
But Jews have a right to live in that land. Now, the argument would be like, Germany has a right to exist, right? Let's just use that analogy. But Nazi Germany didn't have a right to exist. So Zionist Israel doesn't have a right to exist because Zionism is based on colonialism, imperialism, and occupation.
So the how matters and the ideology matters.
The how matters. So Israel, the Jewish people have a right to exist in that land. There's a historical tie to them. Just like the Palestinians have a right to exist in that land. And Palestinians are mentioned in the Bible. It's just that in the Bible, they're called Philistines. Old Testament. The Old Testament, of course, has its biases. It was written by the Jewish people, inspired by God. So Philistines are very much branded, and the narrative is very much against them. So you go by that narrative, the Philistines were the oppressors, the Jews at that time were the oppressed. Just like the British, just like the English and the Irish were the bad guys 1,000 years ago. The English were suppressed. Guess what? It happened. The English became the colonizers, they suppressed Ireland, Northern Ireland. So what I'm saying is that roles shift and change.
Yes.
And that's how we're going to have to approach the Israel-Palestine issue. We have to validate everybody's pain. Wow. We cannot use the word Palestinian Holocaust. Millions of people were put in gas chambers in Europe, the Jews. You got to use the word genocide, mass genocide. Certain words have context. You don't use that because you devalue millions of Jews in German ovens being killed. So you got to be not just be Machiavellian. I'm not being Machiavellian, compassionate about acknowledging people's pains.
Wow.
There is no people like the Jewish people. There's no people in the world that have been persecuted like the Jewish people, especially in contemporary history. Going back to World War II, 80 years ago. You have to acknowledge that. And they were hated across Europe, then they were being pushed out. So they had very Machiavellian leaders. The founder of Zionism was a secular Jew named Theodor Herzl. He came into scene in 1897. You have to understand, 90% of the world Jewry lived in Europe in the late 1800s. 90%. Now we got about 7.5 million in America, 7.5 million more or so. I have the numbers here. In Israel, and the entire population of the world Jewry is about 15.5 million people. So they migrated from Europe where they were persecuted for centuries. I mean, things that were unfathomable. You know, people would watch the Passion plays, right? Passion plays is basically like the story of the Passion of Christ, which Mel Gibson documented. It did happen. But back then when the church sort of accused the whole generation of deicide, you killed Christ or Christ killers, these people watch the Passion plays and they're like, let's go do a pogrom. There's a Jewish village. Look, everybody, look, there's a Jew over there. And they just mowed these people down, killed them. And then plagues were blamed on Jews. Oh, Black Plague was done. Oh, the Jews put in poison in our drinking wells. I mean, terrible, terrible mischaracterizations and accusations. So in about a couple of centuries, or I should say about 1,000 years, they were so ostracized that the Roman Catholic Church didn't want them to become part of the feudal system, which means owning land. What did they have to do? They were shoved into cities, which later became known as ghettos, because there were these Jewish neighborhoods called ghettos, and they couldn't have land, they couldn't have ownership of anything. All they could do is save their money, mostly save it in gold, because they could hide gold when pogroms came. That's why we call it jewelry.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that. Wow.
They had to, because they could carry it on their back when they were being harassed and killed. And so in their system, we have to be, again, a little bit critical here. In the Talmud, there's categories for Jews and non-Jews, and it's very racist how they behave to non-Jews. It's called goyim, actually. Very racist term. So in their mindset is that if you lend money to another Jew, you don't charge interest. But if you lend money to a non-Jew, you charge interest, usury. Catholic Church Christianity is against usury, or used to be, before Knight Templars invented the global banking system. So these people were pushed into that, pushed into ghettos, pushed into not even having, literally not having paper currency, having gold and diamond and all this stuff. That's why we call it jewelry. So they could escape when the authorities came after them to just completely what they call liquidation. The Nazis did that too. They would come and take everything from them that was worth value. Precious art, pianos, anything. So these people were forced into becoming the Zionists were forced into becoming the monsters that they have become. So
because they were oppressed and they had to reclaim their power, and they became Machiavellian in the act of reclaiming their power.
And now you got Israel.
Okay.
This is the byproduct of centuries of discrimination and hate and prejudice against them. And so the ones that were not authentically... The reason I'm telling you all this context and history is because if you talk to a Jewish person about Israel with this context, they almost cry. Because they say, you know what, he understands my history. He understands. My best friend is Jewish. That's why I developed the sympathy, because we fellowship. He told me his father said, Alex, it's Sunday. You're safe today. Because on Sunday, everybody's going to church. I'm not harassing them.
Yeah.
Imagine injecting that thought into a child.
Yeah.
Right? That fear thought into a child, which is logic fear. What is he going to do? He wants to be that, and that Jewish person and eventually becomes a Zionist, and the Zionist wants to be Nazi-ish, wants to be armed through the teeth. So if somebody does this, he punches. If somebody slaps, he punches. If you punch, he'll kick. And if you kick, God help you, because he'll come at you with whatever he's got. And so that's called the Samson option in Israel, which means if our national security strategy will level everybody out, which is what Prophet Samson did.
Yeah.
Remember in the Philistine temple?
Yeah.
He was blind, and he said, I'm going to just bring the whole temple down. I'm going to die in it.
Right.
The Zionists perverted the whole idea.
Yeah.
And it's called the Samson option. So it's what Freud talked about. Freud was Jewish. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychology, he said, if people who are victimized don't go through the process of healing, they become the victimizers. And that's exactly what the Zionists have become. And that's why sometimes I encourage the Palestinians, because they're standing up for the victims. They become the voice of the voiceless. And so what I'm trying to tell you, giving
that
you
was a
elaborate
beautiful elaboration of how you can see both sides, but why you land.
Validation. You got to validate everybody's suffering.
Yeah.
Because when you don't, they feel like they got a chip on the shoulder.
Yes.
When you do that, people bring that, and then you have dialogue. I'm responsible not just to talk to my friend. I'm morally responsible to talk to my enemy.
Yes.
That's who I need to talk to.
Yes.
Because then we get out of the echo chamber.
Yep.
We make dialogue. What's the next step we do? We break bread. Jews really call it breaking bread. We have meals together. What happens with meals? It's the most basic form of nurture, physical nurture. After the concept of emotional nurture, which is love, physical nurture is food. So you break bread together. And there's a 7-step, in a Jewish mindset, there's a 7-step for apologies. So they need to apologize using the same 7 steps. I have them here, I'll read it to you. And Palestinian, if we go, and there's so much grace when you have Jewish friends that are true Jewish people, full of love and compassion, there is so much grace within them.
Wow.
When you say something and you apologize and you go through the 7 steps, and this is not 7 steps Machiavellian or manipulative. It's really based on resolving the problem.
Wow.
That's how you create peace eventually, and it's grassroots. It's one person at a time. That doesn't mean you're not a warrior. Warrior in an intellectual sense.
Yes.
I don't believe in a gun.
You articulate your positions and you stand behind
up.
them. Yeah.
Absolutely. You stand up for the person that's being persecuted. But on the same token, you take into consideration the reasonable members of the people that one side calls the enemy. You take them into consideration, and those are who we call the cooler heads.
Yeah.
The cooler heads are not pacifists. They're not sitting back and scared of talking, scared of going on media. No, these guys got the tongue of fire. Tongue of fire comes from the day of Pentecost, 50 days after the resurrection of Christ. And all the apostles were gathered together, and suddenly they saw flames on top of their head, and it looked like a tongue. Now, in a lot of charismatic Protestant offshoots, they think tongue of fire means talking gibberish, speaking in tongues. No, in the Middle Eastern language, tongue of fire means you spoke different languages. Like in Arabic or Hebrew or Turkish or Persian, you say the word tongue is language. So they say, how many tongues do you speak? That means how many languages do you speak? My point is that when you're given the tongue of fire, and Luke 21:15, for I shall give you the speech of wisdom, so none of your enemies can contradict you. I'm paraphrasing it. That's what cooler heads do. They're not cool in the sense of Obama cool, Obama no drama. No, there is drama. Sometimes you got to go in, and you have to be vocal, and sides has to be chosen. The idea, the reconciliation method is to talk to your enemy. Love your enemy is what Jesus said. Love your enemy. Why did he say love your enemy? First of all, what word did he use for love? English, we just use the word love throughout the New Testament. The Greek language, which the New Testament was written in, was very specific. He used the word agape. Agape love is the most unconditional, godly-like, which it requires what? What did Apostle Paul say in the love chapter, Corinthians chapter 13? When he wanted to define love, he said, love is patient. Love is kind. All the holy scriptures, whether it's Zen Buddhist scriptures or Christian scripture, these are very well put together. Every word has its place. And the Greek word for love, for patient, the correct word for the word patient in English is love is long enduring. It's going to be long enduring of persecution and sufferings, which I have so many Jewish friends that are. You have to understand, original, authentic, Mosaic Judaism was about becoming a nation of priests and peacemakers and holy men and mediums and channels between the holy, between the sacred and profane, between the exoteric down here and the esoteric up there. That is the holy, righteous role they were given. And then we came in the narcissism, the chosen people. And that took the life of its own. We could go into a lecture of what happened there. Judaism, there was a schism in Judaism between Mosaic Judaism and these two brothers, which Zionism really, the esoteric roots of Zionism start right back there. Moses went to the mountain, the other ones down there built the golden calf statue, worship the cow and all that, which has esoteric symbolic meanings. And that's how it happened. So with Jewish people, because you said talk to the audience that are pro-Israel in this video, the authentic Jews say we got to abide by God's laws and rules. And you go back to the Old Testament, the book of Leviticus, where all the laws are laid out, you have to be the most compassionate to your enemies. If you mistreat your animals, it's a sin in the Old Testament. And you talk about vegetarianism and veganism, it's right there. I'm not per se, promoting veganism or any of that, but compassionate to animals, any living creature, which found its way in Zen Buddhism, interestingly, all the way in the East. So that was the true Mosaic Judaism. And then you had this parallel false Judaism of the two brothers, Yanis and Yabres, which said, we don't need God. Let's go back to Egypt. They were giving us land. I mean, we had an apartment, had a condominium, right? We had food in our stomach, we had job security. Even though the slave mentality, we don't need God. Get the God out of the equation. That's Zionism of 1897 under Theodore Herzl, which was based on disappointment and heartbreak.
Wow.
Every atheist is a person who's brokenhearted.
Wow.
Who gives up hope in God. God didn't protect me. That's how they think. That's when the schism took place. The Mosaic Judaism, which culminated into Prophet, what's his name? Joshua, which the word Jesus really means Joshua, Yeshua in Hebrew. Joshua was a pacifist, then he became a warrior, and then the false Judaism narrative crept into real Judaism narrative to the point where they said, Joshua, God told you to go kill the Amalekites. What did Netanyahu say not too long ago? The Palestinians are Amalekites. You're supposed to go kill their women, children, animals, everything. The false Judaism crept into true Judaism, and all scriptures are flawed, whether it's Quran or the New Testament, because history crept in, and political opportunities crept in there and put wars in there and whatnot. They say with Islam it's less corrupted or not corrupted at all because the text is purely in Arabic. Only recently they've translated it to English, the past 500 years. You had to learn Arabic to understand the correct text and its meaning and its context. But with a lot of scripture, the falsehood got in, the whole concept of sacrifice into Judaism, which culminated in Islam, was a Canaanite pagan thing. Sacrificing animals? Why? What kind of a bloodthirsty God wants you to sacrifice a lamb? You know, people say, oh, it's got symbolic meanings. Well, yeah, but in the old temple, they literally killed, people paid more money, Chris, for an unblemished lamb, just to kill it. That is, to me, the definition of Luciferianism. Not a compassionate Jehovah or God, right? And that's another story. But in the Old Testament, when he mentions the sons of God, Elohim versus Jehovah, it's totally different. If you deep into esotericism, these have different meanings.
Right.
So it's deeply
Many
corrupted.
Elohim.
Yes. Why is Elohim plural? We're supposed to be monotheistic.
Yeah.
But Eli or El is the singular God, where we get the word Allah from. People get it in Islam.
Yes.
So what is that all about? Sons of God, the Nephilim, the fallen angels. I mean, these things have been talked about tremendously in the past 20 years. I don't need to talk about it. Your audience probably knows exactly what I'm talking
actually,
about.
I just got into this like months ago, and I haven't talked about it on the podcast.
There's some great scholarly work has been done on this. It started with what people call conspiracy theorists. That's the epithet, right? To shut down articulate debate. But
the minute you start looking into ancient religion, then
Jordan
you go,
Maxwell.
oh my God, this is all they talked about.
Jordan Maxwell did some incredible work starting 30, 40 years ago. He died a couple of years ago. He was the father of delving into esotericism, not from a cultic, Freemasonic perspective, but to expose Freemasonry, which actually found itself into the Old Testament. People say Freemasonry is a recent phenomenon of 500 years. No. Freemasons, first of all, Masons means stonecutters. These were the people who collaborated with Solomon to build the temple, the second temple. Jordan Maxwell.
I want to look into him.
Look into him.
Because all that I've learned about the esoteric and the occult has come from kind of people who believe it in magic and practice it. It's hard to find sources that study it. Like Robert Sepper is a good example of that.
Robert Sepper is what we call a freelance anthropologist. That's how he introduces himself. I'm not sure if he's a trained professional anthropologist, because I've followed him and he says things that are baseless. Because he starts with this thesis that he wants to reinforce. In true academia, your thesis should be based on facts. It has to go through the scientific method of hypothesis, trial and error. You have to disprove your own thesis if it's not valid. So by the time it becomes a thesis, it has to be scientifically valid from a social science perspective. He starts with the thesis and he sort of takes off from there and explores it, and then there are massive fallacies in his work.
I think that's fair. I mean, a lot of the video titles are like, I don't even want to watch, because I'm like, you're talking about like, Atlantis and like just very specific things about it. And it's like, what? Like,
where's your source?
Where?
I mean, there's a lot of, when it comes to Atlantis, there's a lot of projection and there's a lot of, presuppositions about that. It's worth looking into because Plato talked about Atlantis. Plato was the student of Socrates, and Aristotle, the father of political science, was a student of Plato. So Plato talked about Atlantis, and there's a whole ocean called the Atlantic Ocean. So there's something worth exploring, but we are sticking to geopolitics.
Yes, let's stick to geopolitics. So one thing that I learned about or was watching recently was just how wars have been started by false flags, like the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam.
Sinking of Lusitania in World War I.
Okay.
Or the German U-boats. Yes.
So if we're to apply that same logic to this Israel-Palestine war, would you apply that same logic to October 7th?
Absolutely. That's an open secret in Israel.
Oh, okay.
That's an open secret. Haaretz, which is a leftist paper in Israel. Again, you have to listen to your political adversaries if they speak the truth. And Haaretz it's an open secret. They're talking about how could this have happened if Netanyahu is the prime minister of safety and militaristic power projection. They moved those partiers, rave partiers and deep house partiers closer to Gaza, and you cannot call it the Gaza border. That is occupied territory. The word border doesn't apply. They moved them closer to that thing. Hamas works for Israel. And I should be actually more detailed, more precise. Hamas works for the Likud party. They're the useful idiot, Likud, the ultra-right-wing Netanyahu party.
Okay.
They work for them. They're just either useful idiots, don't know it. They think they can use the Likud to do their own political, achieve their own political purposes, or they're just flat-out sellouts. So all this talk about supporting Hamas, you could be pro-Palestine. It doesn't have to be either or, pro-Israel or pro-Hamas. This is the idiocy of some of these people. Hamas are not good guys at all. If you criticize them, they'll chop your head, and your body will be, lying around in Gaza City, somewhere in the Gaza Strip. That's how they have managed to control power since 2005, when they democratically did get elected. But there hasn't been any election since 2005. Imagine if we hadn't had an election since George W. Bush, who Obama replaced in 2008, and George W. Bush was still the president. Because he got democratically, he didn't actually. Al Gore won that election. Yeah. But if he got democratically elected, we would say, they're the representative of the Palestinian people because they got George Bush is a representative of America because he got elected in the year 2000. No, they just didn't allow any more elections there. Their methods are unsound.
Did they change their own constitution?
That they did, yes. Okay. We got to be fair and balanced. They took the wiping off of Israel, I don't know about the death to Israel. That's another stupid chant. Death to any country is stupid, especially if it's UN recognized. But the obliteration of Israel, they took out. The Zionists won't tell you that. They still tell you the old story, which these people reformed out of, Gaza people. Yes, they did. Good for them. They grew up, they evolved a little bit. But there's great scholarly and investigative journalistic work done by Max Blumenthal, Zero Hedge, Chris Hedges. These are authentic, real journalists, no conspiracy nonsense stuff. I'm an academic. I'm not interested in conspiracy theories. I'm very much interested in conspiracy facts. October 7th was a 9/11 for them, and they kept repeating that. It's the first thing using neuro-linguistic programming, emotional language. This is Israel's 9/11 moment. Well, only a dummy would have fallen for that because we know what 9/11 was really all about. Yeah. So when he's similarizing it to that, I saw that right from the beginning. Yeah. And then you look at the facts and look at what Max Blumenthal has produced and talked about in his podcast. He's a great thought leader, great, but he focuses on Israel-Palestine only. He's Jewish, wonderful anti-Zionist Jews we have up there. God bless them. All wars are based on deception. This is right out of the Old Testament. The motto of Mossad, the defense of the intelligence service of Israel, that's the equivalent of our CIA. Used to be, they changed it because it got so embarrassing. They used the sentence from the Old Testament. I have it here, the quotation. The chapter and verse. That was their motto around their logo, which was, "Thou shalt wage war through deception." Those of us who are anti-war, those of us who have fought in wars, or our children are wars, or whatever, the reason we're anti-war is not because we want to hold hands and sing Kumbaya and be under the influence of some drug. The hippies, right? The hippie movement was all about CIA injecting drugs into that movement to make a bunch of crazy lovey-dovey people. There's a very common sense opposition that we have toward war, not because it just kills innocent people. People think, you're anti-war because you hate innocent people being dead. It's more than that. War is based on deception. So we are against lies and deception. That's another reason why we're anti-war activists, pro-peace activists. Not because we want to sit around and do drugs and hold hands and run around and wear orange, garments and, just go around and just sing Hare Krishna songs. I'm not dissing those guys. I'm just saying there's a very practical side, principle side, beyond physical death that we are against. That's why when in Ephesians 6:12, Apostle talks about we are fighting against powers and principalities of the air, against things that are not just flesh and blood. Deception are demonic ways of warfare.
Yes.
It's psychological warfare. Everything is psyop, psychological warfare. Truth has to be psychological warfare. And I hate to use the word warfare, but it is. When you're fighting for peace, you're fighting a war for peace. And our wars are based on deception. George Orwell, or I think, yeah, it was George Orwell who said, in the time of conflict, truth is the first casualty. We want the truth. We want to know who's benefiting from the wars.
Wow. Who do you
That's-
think that is in this case?
Everybody. Mostly, since the advent of oil and armaments, well, we've had armaments going back to time since we know how to fashion iron and steel and whatnot. The primary industries that benefit from war are the steel industry, the oil industry, and the armament industry. In other words, weapons of mass destruction plus the oil component. Now, people say, oh, big oil, this, that. Guess what? Pentagon wants to build tanks that use solar panel. Okay? So any form of energy could be profitable if it's used for war.
I see.
Right? So, oh, it's all solar, wind. They're going to come up with technology that doesn't use oil. And Trump was really open about that. He was correctly making fun of tanks, electrical tanks that are going to run out of charge in the middle of a battle. Complete BS.
So if we're talking about like the powers that be that profit from war, it's those industries and corporations that produce the most economically for a country, like steel, like oil.
We call them
pharmacy.
Pharmacy is interesting. You mentioned pharmacy because we have soldiers coming out with all sorts of psychological problems. We have 22 veterans who commit suicide after these wars we've had, Afghanistan and Iraq war. We've never had a war in our country's history where more soldiers killed themselves after the war, not in the theater of war, not in the battlefield, because that happens. When you're so fed up and you can't handle pure raw hell, people kill themselves. That's a different, in the Bible, it says Saul falling on his sword. It's a warrior's death. There's honor in that. But we're talking suicide here in the pit of despair and weakness, right? 22 veterans a day. So yes, we should talk about big pharma being a huge part of it, because if you go to VA now and you got these problems, first thing they do, instead of giving you therapy, boom, right into medication. So now the big pharma should be added to oil industry and armament industry and steel industry. That actually came to me right now throughout the course of our discussion. Anybody who profits from war, we call them defense contractors in this country, right? Defense contractors are raking it when there's a war. And a very dark side of those guys is that you get to experiment the most devious types of weapons when there's war. I'm talking real avant-garde stuff that you cannot use experimentally in times of peace.
Yeah.
You get to use them because we got to fight the enemy.
Yeah.
I'm talking invisibility technology. I'm talking stuff that laser technology from satellites to zap your enemies. Ronald Reagan called it Star Wars, right?
Right.
Stuff is real. It's not conspiracies.
Right.
So we got that element of it too. So these people are creating new weaponry because war is an opportunity for them to experiment with that stuff.
And objectively, if you own those, that is power.
You're going to want to use it.
Protect that.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, we are both, boys. When we had toys, playing with toy cars, at some point, we weren't just sitting on our shelves.
Yeah.
We want to play with it and race cars. And so, same with war, Same with defense contract. You create all these weapons and, going back to the Romans, their proverb or their saying was civis pacem para bellum in Latin, which means if you want peace, prepare for war. That is solid doctrine. You got to have armed forces. You got to spend trillions of dollars. That's how you defend yourself. I'm not about the abolishment of war or, in the I think it's in the book of Isaiah, it says they shall turn their swords into plowshare, things like that. Yeah, that's all wonderful. When Christ comes, that is going to manifest. But that hasn't happened yet. So we got to defend ourselves. We got to have a big, large, well-equipped army to the teeth. It's just that with power comes responsibility and restraint. And that's, going back to our questions remaining, that's the image that Trump was projecting. That even though he never served in the military, and I'm one of those people who believe we should bring the draft back, get the kids to be involved to see how horrific war is. I mean, a lot of these veterans who came back after Vietnam War who were drafted, where the anti-war voice says. One of those guys is worth 1,000 of these guys speaking against war because they were there. They saw things, they did things they had to do, and they did things they were ashamed of, and they served the country whether you agree with that phrase or not. You gotta bring the draft back because people have to have a stake in not wanting to go and get killed, right? Kids today, they don't give a damn because it doesn't affect them, even though in the long term it does. And then our presidents should be military people. because they've been to wars. The last president we had who served in the military was George H.W. Bush, the father, served in the military. Believe it or not, with all the terrible things that he's accused of, and he didn't want to expand the Gulf War in 1991, US's war, the coalition's war in Iraq. We went in, got Kuwait back, and got out. These guys fought in wars. George H.W. Bush, not the W was in the National Guard. That was a get-off-free card in Vietnam.
Right.
Rich Daddy will let you be in the National Guard so you don't get to go to Vietnam. You know, he showed up with his flight suit, landed on that aircraft carrier. There's a cop there, and he's supposed to. I mean, it was ridiculous. Last military president we had was George H.W. Bush, and in practice, he didn't expand that war that his son did. Oedipus complex, you know, is what Freud called it. We gotta have people from the military because they have seen the horrors of war, and war wouldn't be the first option for them. So we got Trump now. He doesn't come from the military background. He was in the military academy because he bought a knife, and his rich daddy, Fred Trump, didn't want him to become a hoodlum, put him in the military academy because he literally bought a knife.
Didn't know that. Okay.
It's not a military experience, but he is anti-war. So the Republicans, believe it or not, I call them neo-Republicans, not establishment Republicans. Those guys are jerks. Neocons are jerks. They're the ones who gave us the Afghanistan war and the war in Iraq and Syria and all the ones. They're the ones that want to bomb Iran today. Not those guys. Trump is gonna, and that's one of your questions that you're posing to me. He's gonna have to get rid of those guys. Deplatform Rudy Giuliani. That guy's a lunatic, crazy grandpa type guy. You know, the guy with the color running down, right? Used to be somebody. He's the one who fought the mob in New York. He's an attorney, very powerful prosecutor. And then he became the mayor of New York City, very divisive at that time. He talked to people back in late 90s, early 2000s. 9/11 was under his watch. But he's gone off the deep end and he's a crazy lunatic. Trump is gonna have to deplatform him. He's in office now. He got those people's votes. Get rid of that guy. Get rid of any neocon in his future administration, because the minute he deviates from that, we will take our support away. Those of us who are conservatives, Republicans, libertarians, warriors, the ones that are common sense people, we will take our support back from this guy. We won't throw it at the guy against him, but we will make a statement that he's not gonna just get elected and do the bidding of the old warmongers, because he wants to finish the Ukraine-Russia war. Trump wants to finish that. Trump doesn't want us to, other than his pro-Israel irresponsible rhetoric, he doesn't really want Israel to attack Iran.
That's what I was going to ask you. Is he comes off outwardly as a very pro-Israel, more so than Kamala was. Or
like at the level of douchebaggery, actually.
Yeah. And so, and yet you're saying that he might actually be the opposite of what he's claiming in that way?
Going back to geopolitics, optimistic way of thinking and idealistic way of thinking and hopeful way of thinking has no room in geopolitics. In geopolitics, it's all about practicality. So we are not hoping, we are not crossing our fingers that he would be more balanced in his approach. We go to him and say the majority of American people don't want this Netanyahu monster, who really is, when you think of it, is a little antichrist in training. Not the antichrist, but the little one in training. I'll go to that because Little was blessed by some Zionist rabbis a few years ago. The videos on YouTube, he referred to him as Melech in Hebrew, which means king. When is the king gonna arrive is what he asked him. Rabbi Schneerson, part of this very ultra-right-wing, crazy Zionist group called Chabad. Right? We talked about it last time. Chabad.
Spelled Chabad.
That's right. They're not good people. They're not good Jews. They're not good Orthodox Jews. The majority of Orthodox Jews are very righteous, good people. They're actually anti-Zionist. This guy, years ago, 30 years ago, there's a video of him that they keep kicking out of YouTube. He keeps coming back, where he tells Netanyahu in Hebrew that when is the Melech going to arrive? Telling him, you're the Melech, you're the king. When are you going to arrive?
What did that mean to them? Because obviously they're not calling him the Antichrist.
We call their Messiah Antichrist. To them, their Messiah, Mashiach in Hebrew, is the Christ. And their Christ is not our Christ. Their Christ is supposed to be a political leader who will become a prime minister or build the third temple. Their understanding of the Messiahhood is very different than us that are Christian and our Muslim brothers.
I see.
Yes, so he's saying, when are you going to appear? This guy has a God complex. Netanyahu has a Messiah complex. He really thinks he's the chosen one. He changed his name. his ancestors are Polish Jewish people. He changed his name to Netanyahu, which is a Sephardic Jewish name in Hebrew, meaning God has given. Meaning God has chosen. Meaning God has chosen me. There is that narrative that people don't understand. That's why there's religious nuts in his coalition government. The Shas party in Israel and all these ultra right-wing, lunatic, genocidal religious people that want to build a third temple, and you think he's the harbinger of it. And they believe Trump, I mean, this is how nutty this gets, Chris.
I know close
that
to nothing
Trump
about
is going to be the
this,
contractor.
by the way, so this is
He's
fascinating.
going to actually physically build a temple like he wanted to build his wall between us and Mexico. These people are crazy. You mentioned geopolitics. These lunatics have found their way in geopolitics. Bible prophecy, their so-called prophecy has found its way in policymaking. In Tel Aviv, in Washington, in Brussels, European Union's capital.
So
that's when it's dangerous, because Bill Maher, you mentioned Bill Maher, he did a very interesting movie many years ago called Religulous.
okay,
You should watch that. And
I'm sure I'd love it.
You will love it. It's hilarious. You got to look at it from a comic factor. I don't
Okay,
agree
it's a
with
comedy, or-
putting down all religions, but it's really funny. And he says that there's a line in a movie at the end of it when he's literally standing at the mountain of Armageddon. Literally, there's a place in Israel called Armageddon, or Mark of Gideon, Mountain of Gideon. He's literally standing there and say, the thing that I hate most about Bible prophecy is self-fulfilled Bible prophecy. And these people are the same people that in the New Testament, around the time of Christ, wanted to push the hand of God into Christ coming in and using violence to get rid of the Romans. Pushing the hand of God, telling the real Messiah how you should behave, because that's in our understanding of Mashiach as a zealot. They were called zealots back then, zealot Jews, that they were pushing the hand of God. And guess what? One of them was Judas. We saw what happened to him. Same kind of people, trying to push the hand of God through violence to build a third temple, because in their neurotic mindset, God cannot be in Israel until the temple is built, because when the temple is built, the Spirit of God will reside in it. Talk about narcissism. You're telling God how His Spirit could reside, and it has to be, guess what? In a temple that you built. So, I mean, this is the dangerous sort of rabbit hole we're getting into right now. And it's not just Jewish, Zionist people. It's the most dangerous Zionists are actually Christian Zionists. So-called evangelical Zionists.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
I also want to say on my last podcast, quoting myself here, maybe this is narcissistic, but it reminded me of something that I thought about, of like, if you can define God in really clearly defined terms and there's no element of mystery to God and unknowableness to God, then he's literally just a tool of power. And so it sounds like in this case, the case that you're making against Zionism is that they've taken this understanding of God, their understanding of God,
out of
and
Judaism.
they've made a religious war out of what is actually just a war on...
Yes. Zionists were leftists. Zionists were secularists in Europe. They were sitting back then in the 1800s in Europe, starting with the Rothschilds in the late 1700s, and saying, you know what? All this observing the law and being compassionate and kind, everything we were told, hasn't worked for us for 2,000 years. That's the conclusion they reached. Rightly so, maybe. I don't know. I didn't live that journey. I didn't have a Jewish reincarnation. You know? So it's like, you know what? We're done. We're done with God. Let's just go back to what the Europeans do best, which is projection of power and colonialism and force and cruelty, which is what Zionism really is. Zionism is taking God out of Judaism and then taking Judaism out of everything else.
Whoa.
You know, and turn into some kind of ideology. And the founders of it were pure secularists. I would even say they were, I wouldn't call them agnostics. I would say they were just downright heathen atheists, God-hating people. You know, not just being agnostic and I'm not undecided whether God exists or not. They were like literally anti-God. And I have diagnosed this problem all the way down to the Mosaic Schism, when he went up the mountain to receive the 10 Commandments, and Yanis and Yabres, who tricked Aaron, Moses' brother, who was crafted in the art of Egyptian magic. They tricked him to build a golden calf, and there's a mystical esoteric reason behind all that we can talk about in another podcast, and that's how
Let's do. I want to talk about esoteric shit with you.
Zionism started not just in the late 1800s in Austria, where Theodor Herzl was an Austrian Jewish citizen. No, you go back to the deep spiritual esoteric roots of it. It goes back way to the beginning. But that's how the fallacy and the heresy started in Judaism, and it's really tragic because here's a religion that was intended to create compassionate, spiritual, godly, priestly kings. The chosen people part of it all came later. Narcissism. We have it in every religion. You know, in Islam, we have the last prophet, therefore the greatest. Narcissism. Christianity, we are the salt of the earth. Narcissism. When we think in those terms, like you said, what we do is go again what the scriptures taught us, which is God made man in his own image, not man making God in man's image. You see the dichotomy? That's what we're doing today. That's what the Zionists are doing, although they don't believe in God. Making that in their image, which is pure blasphemy. In Judaism, there are a lot of laws against blasphemy. The worst thing you could do in that religion is blasphemy. Be blasphemous. That's when they went at Christ, the blasphemer. You're saying you're son of God. Me and my Father are one and the same. Remember? That's the last thing he said before he left the temple. Went to the Garden of Gethsemane. Last thing he said is that my Father and I, we are one and the same, and thou shalt see. And then he said that at his trial, Christ, with Sanhedrin, the religious authority, he said, the Josephus turned to, not Josephus, what's his name?
Judas?
No. The head of Sanhedrin, the high priest, the most powerful.
I forget his name.
They'll come to me. He looked at Christ and he said, are you the Messiah, the Son of God? Right? He said that, and Jesus very calmly looked at him and said, I am. And the word I am is very mystical. It's a code in Judaism. Because when Moses came down, his experience with the burning bush, the last thing he asked God is, God, what should I tell the Israelites in Egypt? Who should I say sent me? And you know what God's answer was? It's a very mystical Hebrew phrase, Yasher, something like that. Eher Yasher, something. He said, tell them that I am sent you. Deeply mystical phrase. Encyclopedias were written just based on this one phrase. So when Christ said, when they told him, are you Messiah, the Son of God? And he said, I am. They knew what that meant religiously. Most people don't know what that meant. And then he went further and he said, and you will see the Son of God descend from the clouds on the right hand of the Father. And then the high priest tore his clothes, which is forbidden in Judaism. He said, he used the most holy sentence in Judaism. He said, monotheism of Judaism. He used the sentence, the high priest, that the Lord thy God, the Lord is one. That means you can't have a son or a cousin of God or a mother of God like they have in Catholicism. Tore his clothes out. My point is that we have become so blasphemous. There's fundamental problems in these three Abrahamic religions. They fall under Father Abraham. First, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Fundamental problems. The fate of humanity is at the hands of the righteous men within these three religions and the lunatics within these three Abrahamic religions in this area of the world that we call the Holy Land. So, if you don't grab this tiger by the tail, and this is what I was telling the Saudi ambassador at the UN, I said, do you really want to turn this region of the world called the Middle East, which by the way is a derogatory term. If you're in the Middle East, you ask people, are you Middle Eastern? They'll tell you, where is the middle and where is the east? We are West Asian. There's a continent called Asia, we're the western part of it. There's a continent called Europe, there's Eastern Europe, Western Europe. West Asian is the correct term. I asked him, I said, Ambassador, do you really want to establish this precedent in West Asia that you started World War III? Because everything good came out of West Asia, the three Abrahamic religions. Renaissance, European Renaissance was based on Islamic expansion of science and philosophy. Islam flourished. You know, Islam today is not the real Islam. The Wahhabi and Salafist, terrorists, These are not Muslims. They're savages. I'm going to have to use that word. They're savages. Real Islam got the Europeans out of the Middle Ages, out of the Dark Ages. Ambassador, do you want to set that precedent where the region that came out with light and truth turned into a region where darkness emanates from it? Because you have a responsibility to history, Mr. Ambassador. You have a responsibility for the integrity and the honor and the reputation of your children and their children and their children's children, to carry the same shame as the Germans did, and as they should forever, for what they did in World War II, especially with Holocaust and all the death. Do you want to become the next Germany to carry that shame eternally? Take caution, Ambassador. Take caution on your tone. Take caution in your actions. You guys have real power. I'm just an advisor. I'm just a counsel. You guys have real power in terms of telling politicians what to do. I tell you what to do, but you need to, what I'm telling you what to do, you need to get it to policymakers and the decision makers. You really want your region to turn into that? You got to talk to the Iranians. You got to talk to anybody else in that region to make sure this thing doesn't get out of control. Otherwise, we'll go back to what Bill Maher said, which is self-fulfilled Bible prophecy. All that stuff will happen. We are at a moment, Chris, where we have the book of Revelation prophecies fulfilled, or going back to the Old Testament and having what I call the Assyrian moment. If you remember in the Old Testament, God was going to condemn Assyria. They were really evil people, really wicked and savages, although they had civilizations. God sent Jonah. He said, Jonah, go to Assyria. Nineveh is the capital of Assyria. That town still exists today in West Asia. Go and prophesy against them that the Lord, thy God, will destroy you. Guess what happened? The Assyrians had an Assyrian moment. They repented, and catastrophe was averted.
Wow.
And Jonah his narcissism got to him, his ego got to him. He got so disappointed that he left. The Bible tells us he lived in the belly of a fish for 3 days, which is probably a euphemism for some underground UFO, underwater UFO, they call USO, undersurface object. And he was in that thing for 3 days, and he came out of it. He went as far as Tarshish, which is the ancient name for Spain, under the Mediterranean. So who knows what that journey was all about, using the ancient alien philosophy of today. That's on History Channel.
I love that you're integrating like these modern phenomena
they're all
into
interrelated.
The ancient stuff.
Everything is interrelated. So we could have a moment that Nineveh had. They repented. And it says in the Old Testament, if my people shall change their ways, I will not only save them, I will exalt them. Who are my people? Is it just a bunch of Jewish people or Muslim or Christian? No, it's humanity. Humanity is God's people. If we all change our ways, we can avert this terrible fate ahead of us.
Wow.
Oh, people say, it's written on stone. You know where that come from? It's written on stone. Commandments. It was written literally on stone by the hand of God, whatever that means. The stones were given to Moses. He brought them down, put in the Ark of Covenants, which everybody knows what that is, right? If you watch those,
like physically, I know what it looks like.
Exactly. The Ark of Covenant was supposed to have those two stones. In him, right? So when we say, that's written on stone, that's where that phrase comes from. It was written. What is written on stone that can never change? The law. The law is beyond human deviation. Today, things that are evil are considered good. What's good is considered evil. Apostle Paul talked about that. Humanity's laws change. Slavery used to be a law. It was evil, but it was the law. It changed. God's law is permanent. It's universal. That's why it's sacred. That's why we say, prophecy is not written on stone, or it's written on stone that we can't do anything about it. No, only the commandments and the law are written on stone, and they're inflexible, absolutely inflexible. They don't change according to the whim of humanity. They are there to help us have structure and order and law, which is what Trump is all about. Republicans are a party of laws and stability. Nobody wins in anarchy except anarchists that are mentally deranged. Anarchy is a reflection of these people's inner psychotic issues. So the law saves us. There's a whole religion based on law and abiding by the law called Judaism. It saves you. It gives you direction. It gives you stability. It gives you certainty, order. That is written on stone. Prophecy stuff, going to the Nineveh example, God is a God of mercy. Let's take something out of the Muslims' holy book. There's 113 chapters in Quran. Every chapter starts with the phrase, in the name of God, the compassionate and the merciful. Every chapter, 112 chapters of 113 chapters start with that.
Wow.
The 113th chapter, God is like, I'm done. That's it. You know what? I gave you 112 chances. This time I gotta have to, manifest the things that are really harsh, like Noah's flood, right? Or all these terrible things, the way the Romans brought down the second temple. I mean, the terrible things that happened in history that unfortunately had to happen. You have to understand that spirituality and God, we are not human beings having spiritual experiences. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. You can't take God out of equation. You can't take God out of geopolitics. You just have to make sure what element of godhood or your understanding about godhood do you want to channel into geopolitics. Are you going to channel the second coming of Antichrist, which a particular religion thinks is the Christ? You're going to do the Bible prophecy thing into and make it happen? Because that's why we went to Iraq in 2003. George Bush's understanding and the neocons understanding, who are all devout, religious people, nutty ones, Babylon has to be destroyed before Christ can come back. Where's Babylon? Iraq. Therefore, we got to destroy Iraq. Messiah is going to have to come back. Well, guess what? That war started in 2003. It's been what, 21 years, right? Next year it's going to be 22 years. It's been 22 years and Jesus didn't come back. Babylon got destroyed. You can't push the hand of God. You can't introduce our lunatic understanding of prophecy into geopolitics and then think God is going to come and save us. Because that's the exact thing that the ancient zealots in Judea wanted to do with Jesus. And Jesus said, no, this is not the way it's done. This time around, I'm coming as a lamb. Second time around, I come on a white sword, on a white horse, with a sword in one hand and a rod of iron in the other. The second Christ that's coming, which is the manifestation of the first Christ, not going to be I'm going to lay down and turn the other sheep. He's going to come and judge and separate the sheep from the goats and judge the world. It's not going to be any lovey-dovey stuff. Love is patient, love is kind. 2,000 years he's been patient and kind with us. This time he's going to be love and compassion and justice. Justice is about kindness and separating the guilty from the innocent. And that's what's going to happen. And in the New Testament, it talks about it. Separating the sheep from the goats. You know the story with that, right? Well, we'll talk about it in the next one, the next esoteric podcast.
Yes.
But, I mean, that's how it is. But we have a role to divert disaster. And the way we do it, going back to our original point, is through convincing the other side. Sitting down and say, Sitting down and say, you know what, I may even want to break. Okay, let me rephrase that. I gotta be careful with that. Sitting down and say, is it possible to break with Netanyahu? Is it possible to convince that he's a malignant narcissist? That he would divert change? He's beyond point of no return. He's like Hitler. Beyond the point of no return. The Romans had a river, it was called the Rubicon, in the Roman Empire, way up in the north. The outer boundaries of the Roman Empire. Once you cross the Rubicon, that's it. You can't return. You've gone too far. Coming back is too long. Personally, I think he's beyond the point of no return. But his Secretary of Defense, the Minister of, I don't know what they call it, Minister of Defense in Israel, he resigned. He got fired and he resigned. I don't remember his name, difficult Hebrew names. There is definitely potential to sitting down with him and convince him in Israel for them to come up with a coalition to stand up against Netanyahu and quite possibly eliminate him physically. I'm not pro-violence. I have nothing to do with those kind of people that believe in going killing leaders. You saw what happened in this country. They tried to kill President Trump twice. I don't know if you read my article. You did read my article.
Yeah, I did.
The prediction.
Yes.
The horrible prediction. RFK actually said the same thing now. And now in Russia, Prime Minister Medvedev said the same thing, that we could have a JFK situation on our hands. I'm not promoting the killing of Netanyahu, but I'm saying within Israel, if policymakers decide, former Minister of Defense, these guys that are real practical guys that did some very terrible things. It was that foreign Minister of Defense who literally after October 7th went on air. And that's why he's scared right now, because they're going to go after him. ICC is going to go after him. International Criminal Court of Justice in The Hague, in Netherlands, the biggest body of justice in the world, the biggest, most powerful court in the world. They're going to go after him for genocide because the day after October 7th or a couple of days afterward, he said, we're going to cut the water, we're going to cut the electricity, we're going to cut the food. That is genocide. But looks like he's really realized that he is not invincible. That guy, maybe you can break bread with him. Maybe you can convince him to come up with a coalition to get rid of these religious lunatics in Israel. So there's several steps that have to be taken that will hopefully change the direction of this cliff that we're going toward, and hopefully President Trump would. The thing with Trump is that he's unpredictable, so he doesn't like to be owned. Going back to that ownership, he doesn't like to be owned by a political group. When Biden got elected, and Netanyahu congratulated Biden, he was really pissed at Netanyahu. Oh no, wait, did I say it right? No. When Biden got elected in 2020, Netanyahu congratulated Biden. Trump was furious because Netanyahu was supposed to be his ally. He went on public, on record, what's the word? He went on record and condemned is not the word, repudiated Netanyahu for his allegiance to Biden. So right now there's tension between them, between Netanyahu and President Trump. And I posted this on Facebook under the post that you liked. I said, this was an American victory. We cannot let the Zionists hijack this victory and say this is a victory for Israel, because that's what they're trying to do. Netanyahu right now, I'm going to use some colorful adult language here, is self-pleasuring himself since Trump got elected, because he thinks Trump is going to come, support Israel, and they're going to attack Iran, their number one enemy of Israel. So he's self-pleasuring himself to that thought. Trump needs to come in and say, no, we're going to have back-channel communications with the Iranians. They're going to have to tame themselves, restrict themselves, and believe me, they will. Iranians they talk the talk with the anti-death to America, death to Israel, but they're very practical. And that's the positive role he can play, because that's what the American people want. The American people don't want us to support Israel to go attack Iran. They don't want that because they've seen what Israel has done to these people, to the Palestinians. And somewhere in the core of every human being, regardless of how racist or prejudiced or brainwashed or intergalactically stupid a person is, part of them, when they see a dead child, something stirs. Very subtle. It builds. And that's why these people have to do it correctly. Because they could alienate the people that are really watching right now. The American people are watching. And the Israelis the Palestinians are finally getting the PR right. Finally. Like, there was this 1 minute video that is going around in social media right now with this Palestinian child carrying her sister on her shoulder. And she's not wounded or anything. The guy comes to her and says, what's wrong? She's like, a car hit me. Right? This is a psyop moment. They didn't just use the same dead children. People got desensitized. It's so evil, people get desensitized. A kid who doesn't have a head. People got desensitized. This was a psyop moment. Everything is psychological warfare. Truth must be psychological warfare. They went to this kid, and she was like, 5. She was carrying a sister that was 2.
Oh, I think I saw that. Yes, I did see that.
Oh my God. And he goes to her, the guy with the camera, is like, what happened, sweetheart? Are you okay? He's like, a car hit me. He didn't say missile hit me or bullet. A car. And he's like, who is that you're carrying? It's my sister. He's like, where are you going? The kid says, I'm going to this camp, hospital, temporary camp, because the Israelis are hitting hospitals. Like, I'm going to this camp to get treatment for my sister. And the guy says, okay, hop on, I'll give you a ride. That's how the heart of people in the Middle East is good. We think if that happens here, immediately we're going to think that person's going to abduct that child, going to traffic that child. In Middle East, it's prison rules. Anyone who harms children, they get killed. And the police will just say, okay, good job. That shit doesn't happen over there. Children are not harmed sexually.
Wow.
How honored there. Here we call it, if you harm a child here and go to prison, other prisons will kill you. So there's a justice system within prison. Over there, it's like societal. You don't mess around with children. The guy takes the child, drops her at the encampment. It's literally a tent. It's a makeshift hospital. Now here's the psyop part of it. The child was blonde and blue eyes. Racism. People here in Europe will identify to that. But compared to if that child looked like me, olive skin with black hair.
Mm-hmm.
They could identify with this. They're like, this looks like one of us. Racism, right? So they reverse
Implicit.
that racism. Implicit
Yes.
or explicit.
Yeah.
People identify to that, and it's going around. My point is that that's building. Trumpers are seeing that. When Trumpers see Rudy Giuliani went up like a week before Trump got elected, he was ranting against Iran and pro-Israel. That if the Israel, this is their logic in quotation. This is the evil, racist, Zionist logic, is that if we don't kill the Palestinians there, they'll come and kill you in the movie theaters in the Midwest. Because they're the terrorists, they're the Muslims. That is their logic, right? And it sells. It has been selling all these years to a point where IDF rabbis, the military rabbis in IDF, openly saying that these are more than goyim. They use a very derogatory word in Hebrew. And this is how these soldiers have turned into Nazis, literally. These Israeli soldiers that are committing horrific
I've heard
things.
some crazy stories.
It's like these are beyond subhuman. They're like a virus. They're like the AIDS virus. They're like COVID virus. If you don't kill it, they're going to infect. That's how they're brainwashing these idiot soldiers over there to commit beyond war crimes with children. So the American people are watching this. The Palestinians finally got their PR right. Record the blonde Palestinian, because you have to understand, Palestinians are multicultural. There's blonde people, there's darker people, brown, different shades, different looks in that part of the world. That is, finally they're doing something smart. Putting on a kafia, which is the Palestinian scarf, covering your, you know what I'm talking about, your face, just so your eyes are showing.
It's unrelatable to the West.
It's unrelatable, and you're reinforcing the Zionist narrative, which is, if it looks like a terrorist, it will act like a terrorist. No. You're going to have to figure out the fashionable way of putting that around your neck so these Caucasian people don't get threatened.
Yeah.
Let me take that back. I don't want to sound racist.
No,
these regular
right.
people wouldn't be threatened.
Caucasian.
Because the minute they get threatened, they'll buy Netanyahu's argument.
Yeah.
Don't threaten them.
So question.
Yeah.
When it comes to rhetoric, that was one topic I wanted to touch on. Maybe we could do just a couple more quick fire and then wrap up. But what do you think is the most important approach that someone who is anti-Zionist and wants a peaceful resolution of sharing land, or I don't know exactly what resolution you want in particular, but or you think is reasonable, but what approach to spreading this message that you're talking about should they take?
From a spiritual, emotional perspective, I will use the word love. From a geopolitical perspective, I would use the word cautious optimism. Not optimism, cautious optimism, which means the Palestinian anti-war activists should focus on reaching people within Israel through the way they themselves behave. So the Israelis wouldn't get threatened by them, which is what's being talked about seriously at the UN level right now, that now is the time to go for the two-state solution. But you cannot have a two-state solution with a bunch like Hamas who want to obliterate you even though they took it out of their constitution. You're going to have to make peace with a segment of Palestinians, which I would define as the Gen Z and millennial Palestinians, who have a different notion of peace. But that is impossible. Let's be more fair and balanced right now. 90% of Hamas militants are orphans. So violence is cyclical.
Oh, yeah.
So Netanyahu goes in and butchers them so he'll have future enemies to fight. Because these orphan kids will go join Hamas.
Right.
Violence is a loophole. Once you caught up in that loophole, it will take leaders like Gandhi or the guy from South Africa. What was his name? Nelson Mandela. What you need in situations like this is leaders that are very transcendent, almost chosen by God, to come in and turn a situation that is action, reaction, right? Quantum physics. No, not quantum physics. Dynamic. I forgot the word. Leaders that are way above the understanding or the emotions of the people. That they validate the revengeful desires of their people, but they would have a way to subdue it through practical measures. Like, okay, the Israelis just destroyed and leveled Gaza. Now we got to partner with Israelis in high tech, in the high finance, to have them build this stuff back for them. I mean, concrete measures like that.
Wow.
Reasonable people on the other side for reasonable intentions. That if you don't build it for them, guess what? There will be more Hamas and more
Yes.
orphans joining that.
Yes.
So it has to be not just some altruistic, idealistic reason.
Campfires and guitars, yeah.
Yeah, practical reason that, okay, we destroyed this, it's war reparations now. It's war reparations. We gotta go rebuild it back for them, which means we were stupid to start a war anyway, which means we should have never supported Hamas in the first place. And that's how you slowly, and then you start all these projects that Bill Clinton, before he turned into a pedophile, there were these amazing things that administration was doing in the 90s. In the 90s, Bill Clinton, they had really good measures that were doing with the Prime Minister of Israel who was assassinated by the Netanyahu supporters. His name was Yitzhak Rabin. He was an Israeli general who became a peacemaker. They're very close, the Palestinians and Israelis, to make peace. It came down to Jerusalem. And they were close to settlements. Two things happened. They sent a Mossad agent called, names don't come to me.
It's all these fire trucks.
Yeah. Monica Lewinsky,
Oh.
the Mossad agent,
Oh.
did what he did to Clinton to delegitimize him. Clinton had to back out of that.
Yep.
Clinton wanted to be the Carter of Middle East, who brought peace between Israel and Egypt. He really wanted that. This is the Clinton back then who was still not a monster, you know, rubbing elbows with Epstein. Different Clinton, although devious. So they neutralized him through Monica Lewinsky because of the oral pleasures under the desk in the Oval Office, and then they assassinated Yitzhak Rabin. And Yitzhak Rabin's wife in that funeral couldn't stand that Netanyahu was there. And if the camera recorded Netanyahu's face, it was like the devil's face. It was like a devil's face. That Israel is becoming schism. They killed a leader like that. So whoever is going to come in and bring in peace from the Israeli side and quite possibly from the Palestinian side, they need to have such a high mandate from God himself that death will be part of that equation. And by that, I mean getting assassinated. Yitzhak Rabin got assassinated, the prime minister of Israel at that time, who brought peace. A few years later, Yasser Arafat got poisoned. It was an assassination. They said it was just a regular death, exhumed the body, tongue was black, proven that it was poison. Netanyahu bunch poisoned him. Right? They go after peacemakers. If you're a peacemaker, what Malcolm X said, if you talk about the word, how do we say it? If you're not willing to die for what you believe in, get the word freedom out of your vocabulary. That was Malcolm X. Killed. JFK wanted to create peace and get rid of nuclear weapons. Killed. His brother RFK got killed in '68. Martin Luther King, 3 months before RFK got killed. We got 4 political assassinations in the '60s. God forbid Trump would not join that list. But whoever with the Israeli leader and the Palestinian leader, they need to have such sense of higher calling and purpose from the realm of heaven itself that death would be part of their mission, that they could quite possibly get eliminated by the extremists from on side. Now my theory is that it's not going to come down to that. My theory is that we're very close to the second coming.
Wow.
Very close.
Yeah.
It's not going to come to that. That Christ himself and the saints will interject and bring in this peace that humanity hasn't been able to bring to that land for as long as the Jews and Palestinians have been living there. And that's why we got to get right with God. That's why the dark forces go after us right now. The dark forces, right? I call it the government, the deep surveillance states. Within the deep surveillance states, there are righteous men, good men. There's a battle for the soul of humanity, even within these deep state apparatus, because they are trying to. The good ones are supporting the good ones out of the deep state, the regular people like us. The bad ones want to literally eliminate, if not physically, but definitely career-wise and whatnot. You need to have a mandate. You really need to have a mandate and a sense of conviction to do what you're doing right now And the things that you're passionate about, Chris, are not accidental. Things you're passionate about when it comes to politics, geopolitics, economics, social issues are not accidental. You were meant to be passionate about it. You were given those skills, given the tongue of fire, the power of oratory, the art of oratory, which all our founding fathers had. Great orators. John Adams. Washington was a quiet one. Definitely Jefferson. Madison. They had the art of oratory. And that wasn't something they developed themselves. It was God-given. And you use that for good. You use that for positive psychological warfare. Psychological warfare is all about winning hearts and minds. That's all it is about. Negative psychological warfare is what? Deception, distortions,
Yes.
distractions.
Luciferian.
Pure Luciferian, pure. Just open up Machiavelli's book, The Prince. The book that he wrote is called The Prince.
Okay.
Every sentence is like, okay, let me just quote the Satan over here said that, Beelzebub over there, Baphomet. I mean, it's just pure evil. You have that route, which has its, shelf expiration dates. Then you have the other route, which is eternal and good, and it will out-survive us and our children and our children's children. And that's how you go about it. The practical side of love. Love should be the compassion. I mean, when I say love, I'm talking about agape. I have to be very careful with the word love. It's too ambiguous. God's love, long enduring, kindness. In Islam, they say compassion, merciful, forgiving, but also a tremendous sense of justice. Right? No justice, no peace was the battle cry of the Rodney King riots way before your time. It was riots in 1990, 1991 in LA. That has to be the recipe. Long endurance of many tragedies to come, kindness, in Islam they call it compassion, merciful, yet with a sense of justice. That's what they call them rioters in LA back in 91. The black people, Latinos, everybody who was protesting what they did to that Rodney King, the driver of that car that the cops pulled him out of, was running away from cops. Big no-no, you pull over. They took him out, they beat the shit out of him. That's when camcorders first got invented. It got recorded. And the battle cry during that time was no justice, no peace. So unless we have justice, there will be no peace. Social justice, political justice, economic justice, ecological justice, military justice, until we haven't gotten that right, there will be no peace.
Yeah.
And that should be the ending thought of our talk.
Sounds good.
All right, buddy.
I really appreciate it, Alexander.
No problem.
You've brought so much wisdom.